Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Marlene Tillman. I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of Gwinnett SToPP. We are a parent-driven organization that works on dismantling the school-to-prison pipeline. And welcome to our education series for tonight. Our education series tonight is separate and still unequal. And we'll learn a lot about that. Last month, we started off with an overview of education, and now we're doing deeper dives into various sections. I want to bring your attention to our story collection on police. We kicked off our campaign on police-free schools. And we are asking to have police-free schools. And if you have a story you want to share about police being in schools, we are here to hear that. So I will drop some links in the chat box. Please be sure to let us know what your stories are, share them with us, and join us in our campaign. And with that, I'm going to turn over the program. Our presenters tonight will be Melody Brooks, Rama So, and Amina Busuri. And I'm sure they're going to give you a wealth of information, and we really appreciate you being here. Melody?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're so excited to be here for our second installment in our Education System in Crisis series. And this time our title is Still Separate and Unequal, Disparities in Education. It's really important to understand that several decades after the Brown v. Board decision, we still do not have equal education for all students. And we plan to go over some of the information of why that is the case. First, we would like to address Gwinnett County's COVID response. It has been extremely disappointing to see the school board move forward with in-person learning starting August 26th. We think this is extremely dangerous. We think this is going to put many people, students, faculty, staff, families, Gwinnett County and Georgia at risk because it's going to rapidly spread COVID. We saw that after Gwinnett released one of its first plans to start August 12th and make masks mandatory, that we saw a teacher protest where teachers were going to the Swanee building and in their parked cars, they were honking their horns and protesting against ignoring science, ignoring statements from the CDC, which is in Georgia as well. And this is where you see the first picture reported by Natasha Chin from CNN. Stop denying science, it's reckless. We are sending kids to school to get an education, but it's sad that once people have an education and they're knowledgeable about disease, infection, how it spreads, we're ignoring the science that tells us that we should stay home and that we should take more precautions. There have also been counter protests, which is basically asking the school board to go forward with plans, regardless of the fact that there's no social distancing happening in the buildings as we speak with the staff that are already there. Masks are going to be really difficult to enforce. And Gwinnett County has the highest rate of COVID infection in the state. So it's important to know that the counter protesters are mainly wealthy white parents and families from Brookwood and Parkview. These are very privileged people who do not represent all of Gwinnett County, which has a growing population of low-income families, of a thriving immigrant community. So it's very important that we, when we talk about choice, because this is what the counter protesters are asking for, when we talk about choice, that parents that are making minimum wage do not have a choice when the school opens. They don't have access to childcare. They're forced to send their kids back to school. So we should be protesting and demanding resources from local, state, and federal, in the federal government to ensure that we can remain safe. And then we also have seen that this last week, Gwinnett County Public Schools released a schedule that is going forward with the in-person learning. And this is going to impact so many people. It's important that we know that so much about this disease is not known, especially when we're talking about children, because they've been out of school and at home since March. And so it's incredibly reckless and dangerous to send kids back to school and to put going back to normal and business interests and profit, putting that before our students. Who will this impact? GCPS students, employees, low-income families, especially Black and Brown communities, which are on the front lines. They are the ones that are the delivery drivers. They're working at the grocery stores. They're interacting with the public on a daily basis, and they do not have hazard pay. They do not have access to adequate PPE. And it's also going to impact multi-generational households. We have a lot of families in Gwinnett County where there is the parents, grandparents, and even great-grandparents all live in the same home. So it's important that we know that even if it doesn't impact the child, which it could impact the child, children can become infected with COVID. Even if it doesn't impact the child, it can easily spread throughout the home, throughout the communities. And since Gwinnett County is the largest county in the state of Georgia and one of the largest counties in the Southeast, the impact is going to reverberate way beyond the schools. So still separate and unequal. The issues that we're seeing now happened well before the pandemic. I think the pandemic really is highlighting how broken the education system, how this country has been, and how we treat certain populations of people, especially Black and Brown people. We don't give the support, dignity, and opportunities that other people in the country receive. So there's a lot of things that we can cite as the issues to why we have a crisis in our education system, but it really boils down to the fact that the United States has decided to properly educate a small population of children, and that is wealthy white children. There are significant resources, after school programs, tutors, college career consultants, all of that, plenty of it available for wealthy white students and upper middle class white students. But for everyone else, schools are underfunded. The classrooms are overcrowded, near 30 students a class, if not more. And so this is why we have so many disparities. Also, public funding for education has been slashed year after year. So while we're increasing the police budgets, military budgets, while we're increasing all of that, we're decreasing our investment in education and social services. And so what we're seeing is less counselors. We know that they've been cutting paraprofessionals in Gwinnett County schools. I know that for a fact, but we are increasing the cops in schools though. And I think that's a very backwards way of doing things. And so the issue is that we have underfunded schools and divested communities. We have areas that have been marked out, canceled out for investment. And those have always been historically in Black and Brown communities. And then we also have the school-to-prison pipeline, which is overly harsh and ineffective discipline that pushes kids out of schools, puts them in another room in the school, or just kicks them out for a few days, up to a week, up to 10 days. And this does not solve the issue because they repeatedly expel the same students over and over again without getting to the root cause. That is the school to prison pipeline. We also have a miseducation. So on top of underfunding, what is funded often is the history that's taught, especially, is revisionist. And so we're talking about a whitewashed version of the civil rights. We're talking missing out, talking about African cultures and countries and histories that happened way beyond the transatlantic slave trade. We're talking about watering down the transatlantic slave trade and not being honest about the significance of slavery in the foundation of this country's history, and the significance of genocide towards indigenous peoples in this country's history. And all these lies we've heard about necessary evil and the first Thanksgiving and all of these ways to really sugarcoat the atrocities that happen are part of the reason why this country is where it is now, because we've never told the truth about what happened. So how can we address something that we continue to lie about? So it's very important that we have a school system that is fully funded, where the teachers have raises, the schools are fully staffed, and we teach authentic history, and we provide services and equal funding for special education as well. It's extremely important. So those are just some of the reasons why education is still separate and unequal. And we are calling for Gwinnett County Public Schools to remain in virtual education for the foreseeable future until significant steps are taken to stabilize the COVID crisis. And so now I'm going to pass the presentation on to Rama, who will be talking about the disparities in Gwinnett County. Thank you for listening.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Rama, and I will be telling you all about the way that school funding works and how that negatively impacts Black and Brown communities in terms of children who go to school. So the way that schools are funded, you get federal funding, state funding, and then local funding. Now, federal funding, it's a very small percentage. It's only about 6% for Georgia, according to the GPVI. And then the state takes up most of it, which is 53%, but a very, very critical funding source for public schools is the local funding. And that takes up 45% of all funding for Georgia public schools. And unfortunately, when you have discriminatory housing practices, like say by banks and in terms of house loans, and then you mix that with real estate agents not showing families homes that they can afford, but they don't simply because of their race. And then you have a racial wealth gap that already exists. And then you mix that with white flight when Black families move into neighborhoods, and then the white people in that neighborhood leave because they know that property value is going to go down. You take all that and you mix it with the property tax funding system, and you end up with certain schools in certain areas having less funding and therefore less resources. So if we were to talk about like an area with more Black and Brown people, usually they tend to be around schools with less funding, and that's because they have less property value most of the time. And if you have less property value, then that means you pay less in property taxes, and therefore less money goes towards the public schools. So you end up with white majority affluent neighborhoods that have, with a higher property value, they get better funding. So they have more extracurriculars, they have more AP classes, they have, sometimes it can affect what dual enrollment, if they offer dual enrollment for their schools to community colleges or state universities nearby. And then you have Black and Brown communities with poorer neighborhoods and less property value. So you end up with less resources, less extracurriculars, less AP classes, and it negatively affects children to have less opportunities. So next slide. So if we're talking disparities and opportunities specifically in Gwinnett County, this property tax funding system plus all of the racism that we see in the education system, it causes these very big disparities in opportunity. And the database that we're using was created by ProPublica. It's called Miseducation, if you guys want to look that up for yourselves. And it shows us that Gwinnett County Public Schools is actually 74% non-white students, but white students are given the most opportunity. So if we look at this graphic right here, it shows us that only about 26% of the students in GCPS are white, 29% are Hispanic, 31% are Black, 10% Asian, Pacific American, and so on and so forth. But if we look at AP course composition, that 31% Black is not nearly as represented as it should be. It's only about 23% Black, and the white community of students in GCPS schools is overrepresented with 35%. And then you move on to gifted and talented composition, and the opportunity disparity is even worse. You have a 44% representation for white students and only a 10% representation for Black students. So ultimately, even though white students make up a very very small percentage, not very small, about a quarter of the percentage of county public schools, they end up being afforded much more opportunity than Black and brown kids in Gwinnett County public schools. So I'm going to show you guys an example. So we have North Gwinnett versus South Gwinnett. North Gwinnett, as we know, tends to be more affluent. There are more white folks up in North Gwinnett. So like I was talking about with the property taxes, and how schools are funded, how public schools are funded, you take a look at these statistics for North Gwinnett, and you can see that there's a lot more white kids at North Gwinnett. So this shows you just how segregated we are in terms of race in Gwinnett County. But if you look at North Gwinnett High School, you can see that it's 56% white, 12% Black, 20% Asian, Pacific Islander, 9% Hispanic, so on and so forth. But you look at the AP course composition and we see the same thing that we saw when we were looking at statistics countywide. We see that while white students aren't overrepresented, Black students are underrepresented. There's only about 8% Black in terms of AP course composition, and then gifted and talented composition is even worse. It's 5% Black. And then as you can see at the bottom, it is 44% non-white students, but you can see that only 10% of the students get free and reduced lunch. So that usually points towards there being a more affluent community up in North Gwinnett, and therefore you can see highest 10% in the district going across all of these in terms of like graduation rates, gifted and talented program percentage, AP course percentage, who's taking the SAT and ACT, which goes into the higher education thing that Amina is going to be talking about shortly, advanced math. And then if we move on to South Gwinnett, we can see that the demographics racially completely change. We have a 74% Black student body, and then a 12% Hispanic, and then 8% white, 2% Asian. And then even though the school is majority Black and there are 92% non-white students, the Black student body is still underrepresented in the course composition. They only make up about 66% of the AP course composition. And as you can see, the white student body is overrepresented. And then you go to gifted and talented composition and it gets even worse. We're at about 58%. And then the white community in South Gwinnett High School gets even larger in the gifted and talented composition. And then now we look and it's 60% of the students that get free and reduced lunch. So that shows the sort of racial and economic divide in terms of North Gwinnett and South Gwinnett as a county and as schools. And we can see they only have an 86, they have a 10% lower high school graduation rate. 9% of the students are in a gifted and talented program. Only 21% are taking AP courses, and only 21% are taking the SAT and ACT. So this can show you, and as you may have seen on the slides already, North Gwinnett, they offer, I think it was 26 AP courses, whereas South Gwinnett, they offer 18. So that funding, that lack of funding that they get, they're not able to provide as many opportunities as they would be able to if they were more heavily funded with their property tax, but they aren't, unfortunately. So, this is just a stark example between two schools in North Gwinnett and in South Gwinnett, but you can do different ones. You can look at Norcross, you can look at Meadow Creek, you can look at Mountain View, you can look at different schools and see just how stark the difference is in terms of their student body demographics and their demographics in AP course composition and gifted and talented composition. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it off to Amina. She's going to tell you guys about higher education opportunities for Black and Brown kids.
Hello, thank you, Rama, for that, because I feel like that really set the groundwork for what I'm about to talk about. So to start off, I wanted to bring up the promise of Gwinnett, which is something that has been around in Gwinnett County for a really long time, and it's something that Gwinnett tends to bank on pretty frequently in terms of showcasing their success in students. And so with the promise of Gwinnett, Gwinnett County Public Schools are essentially promising that their mission is to prepare kids for the best future to come. And I think that it is personally extremely difficult to prepare students for having the best future when there are so many disparities between finishing K through 12 and moving towards higher education, which we all know tends to provide students an opportunity to have new experiences, see where maybe their passion lies in terms of studying and working, and also just getting explore their education to the fullest without having such a rigid core structure in high school, for example. So I pulled a few pieces of data from the ProPublica miseducation data point as well. And in my case, I compared Brookwood students with Meadow Creek students because there's a 20% disparity between the graduation rates of the two schools. As we know, Brookwood High School is in northern Gwinnett, and the white population at the school is 41%, and they have a 93% graduation rate. Whereas at Meadow Creek, the white population is only 3%, and there's a 73% graduation rate. That is extremely significant because with schools that exist in the same county, I don't think the disparities get any more stark than a 20% difference between two schools that exist within the same district, essentially. And so I think that pulling also the SAT and ACT data points really gives to how students are prepared for college readiness. As we know, the SAT and ACT are important standardized tests for essentially any school for higher education. If you don't have an SAT or an ACT score, chances are you probably aren't going to continue your education post high school. And the percentage of students at Brookwood that take the SAT or ACT is 33%, whereas at Meadow Creek it is only 14%. And that is about half again, where there are twice as many students at Brookwood taking these standardized tests, and at Meadow Creek there are half of the number of Brookwood students that are taking those exams. If we could go to the next slide, we'll see that, well, just from my personal experience being a first generation student of color, also low income from Meadow Creek, there is a lack of college readiness and there is a lack of funding. there aren't as many resources, and that also gives to the local funding that Rama was talking about, how almost half of the funding of schools depends on the local funding, and in areas where the population is majority low income, it shows obviously that there is something missing in terms of funding and resources and access, with how students at schools like Meadow Creek, where students are typically first generation, low income, are missing out on a lot of really important resources and opportunities in order to explore if higher education is something that they even want to pursue. Not that it's entirely necessary for every student to do so, but I think that without even being presented the option, students are being robbed of an opportunity they may have really enjoyed and could have taken advantage of. So a few of the blockades that prevent first generation students, especially of lower income and students of color, is that there isn't as much information around required standardized testing, such as the ACT and SAT. So students aren't even getting the resources that they need in order to take these exams, which rely on these scores in order to get into college. So if they miss deadlines their junior year, then they're basically set up for failure if they do go into senior year wanting to pursue higher education, because there aren't as many opportunities within your senior year to take these exams. And so without having the information that this is something that's necessary to be done even before your senior year, a lot of students end up missing the mark simply because of an exam. The application process and deadlines are also another really big point. A lot of the applications for colleges cut off in January, but there are, moving into the next point as well, scholarships and other resources that students need to know about, like loans, housing information, tuition breakdown, and things of the sort, that a lot of students who don't have parents that have been to college, this knowledge just isn't first nature to them. It wasn't first nature to me. I needed a counselor to tell me these things because I didn't really know entirely what direction I needed to go in or where to really even start. And considering there aren't classes that even prepare you for college readiness, I think it's even more important that this funding exists so we can have counselors, for example, and advisors that can help guide students that obviously want to pursue higher education, or even students that don't necessarily even want to, students that just want to know more in case it is something that they want to try out. But the reality is that the opportunity isn't even presented there in the first place, and a lot of students end up missing out on being able to explore that avenue just because of how inaccessible it has been made. And this is truly something that is done through lack of funding, because if schools like Meadow Creek did have more funding, then there would be a place to pour into students and their future success, as we hear in the promise of Gwinnett. Yet there isn't something set up like that already. Therefore, a lot of students are missing out on being able to do so. So I'm going to pass it back over to Melody, who will talk about our future meetings.
Yes, and before I thank you, ladies. First of all, that was amazing, and I really related to a lot of that information growing up in Gwinnett as well. I graduated from South Gwinnett High School, so a lot of the information that Rama was discussing hit home. It was a stark difference. It was two different worlds happening inside the same school, and so it's really disheartening to see that even after integration, that there's still with tracking and different opportunities available inside the school, that it's still separate and unequal in the same building. So that's something that Gwinnett County needs to address. I wanted to actually pose a question to Marlene to kind of cap all of this off. So one of the things that Rama and Amina were discussing was property taxes and how that impacts resources available, whether that's college readiness or just more funding for more teachers and various things. But there's also a malice that I believe that also takes part here, that beyond the property beyond the property taxes, that there are still decisions being made that still favor schools like Brookwood and Parkview and their areas. For example, I know for a fact that Rockbridge Elementary School is majority Latinx, but I saw very few teachers that actually spoke Spanish in the elementary school, especially kindergarten. So that's, I mean, at the very least, you should have a teacher that speaks your own language, even if the property taxes aren't significant. So I was wondering, Marlon, if you could speak to the racial bias that goes beyond the property taxes and the decisions that a GCPS makes to prioritize some schools over others.
How much time do we have? So let's start there. So one of the things when Gwinnett SToPP first formed was getting data, being able to show through quantitative data what we knew through qualitative data. Essentially, we knew what was going on from the stories, but we needed the numbers to back it up. One of our first projects that we did on research was the Snellville schools, and that's South Gwinnett, Shiloh, and Brookwood. And full transparency, my children went to Brookwood. I became aware of the disparities within the city of Snellville. All three of those schools are in the city limits. I became aware of the disparities within those schools as I started visiting around. My sons ended up with friends from other schools, and we did more research into those schools. And it was amazing. It was just amazing. And it's still very stark today. So how do you're in the city of Snellville, and there are very different decisions being made as to how many AP classes there are. That's true today. There are distinct differences being made as to how many police officers are stationed in the building, how many arrests happen at school. And I must say, as those schools, when we moved here, those schools were more 50-50 Black and white, and a few Latinx. But as time has moved on, of course, just like the rest of the country, there's a browning of our school system. And I just want to add, for right now, there's probably about only 18% of the population in Gwinnett County schools, student population in Gwinnett County schools is white. So, and I was going to ask what year where your data was from. Probably gauging from the year, I could probably guess it since I stay in it. But today, I know it's around 18% white students. But then Gwinnett was not as homogenous, right? And as those schools got browner, I noticed differences happening. For instance, Shiloh High School got another police officer. Brookwood did not. The number of arrests that happened, particularly in the South Gwinnett districts at the middle school level, was unreal. It was just unreal. The interesting thing is that the kids were being arrested for fighting, and Black kids were being arrested for fighting, excuse me. Black kids were being arrested for fighting and disrespect. White kids brought guns, they brought drugs. And you see that stark difference of, well, they must be misbehaving more, they're doing more illegal things. No, the illegal side was on the other ones. But, again, the browner schools got more school resource officers. I watched, I was part of PTA when my children were in school. So I got to see the programs being brought in and told about the new grant that the county got, and it went to Brookwood. Brookwood was already enriched. We had a PTA that did a great job at fundraising, and the school did a great job at identifying programs, but everything new that came into the county went into Brookwood, and probably at that time then into Parkview, followed by Duluth and North Gwinnett. So some of that has shifted a little bit. However, the prioritizing that goes to certain schools based on demographics, who's in those more challenging classes. And I can tell you one of my favorite presentations was the Tale of Two Snellvilles, where I would line up arrest, race, academic achievement, discipline. You cannot tell me that a lot of this is not intentional. The data speaks to it. The qualitative data speaks to it. We know what is happening. This has been a system that's been built on racism and still is there. You can look at the upper, and we just got our first Black school board member in 2018. How does that happen? Yeah. The whole upper echelon of Gwinnett County Public Schools is white. How is that happening? The teaching staff is majority white. And there's no cultural competency training going on. None. I don't know how you set up that kind of environment. Don't prepare people to be in that environment, and not think that what plays out is going to play out. The other thing is the new teachers go into the browner schools. So as those schools get darker, that's where they ship the new teachers. They get to practice, cut their teeth, and then they're out of there within 2 years. And so we get all the new teachers. If you look up the percentages, you can go to the civil rights data collection. And even though that data is kind of dated at this point, it's from 2016, it'll show you the percentage of how many new teachers go into the Brookwood School. And I can tell you, my children going there weren't many, okay? So first year teachers, look at first and second year teachers on the civil rights data collection. Look at it for, again, I can do the Tale of Two Snellvilles right now, what it is for Brookwood and what it is for Shiloh, what it is for South Gwinnett. It is a stark difference. Those kind of differences don't happen in the same community without it being intentional. There is a devaluation that happens, and that happens out of intentionality.
Thank you so much. That was very insightful. I think that was the perfect way to encapsulate everything, because one of the things I think people need to understand is that multiple things can be true. And so I think there is definitely malice there. And I think that there's, the property taxes situation, but then when you look at Snellville, what's happening, so much is happening in Snellville, depending on the name of the school. It's almost like there's a certain branding going on with certain schools. They have a brand that they have to protect. And that shouldn't be.
No, it should not. It absolutely should not. You notice that branding too, and how the teachers feel about the school, which translates to how they feel about the students and how they treat the students. So that is problematic as well.
And that also, how you feel and how you treat also extends into the gifted and the tracking.
Let's talk about tracking since you all brought it up.
Yes.
So I find it interesting so the state of Georgia says you select your top 10% of students for gifted, right? So it's based on testing. I won't even talk about the racial bias in the testing, okay? I'm just going to say it's based on various tests. And so the top 10% of who scores on that within a certain range get to be in gifted, right? Look at the Tale of Two Snellvilles. You can do it all over the county, quite honestly. Go find one of the brown schools and find out what percentage of students are in gifted. And then go to one of the valued schools or just not majority students of color. And you will find such a large percentage of the kids in gifted. Now, how does that happen? Did they don't get to be gifted, or is it that the staff doesn't see it? And I watched that play out in a situation. I once worked in a school system in Maryland. And I was noticing and I was in elementary school, so this is first graders. And I watched one of the ESOL students who spoke very little English. And I did math and reading support. And one of the little boys would catch on to those numbers, and he was flying through this math. But he was an ESOL student, so they did the pull out sometimes to help bring his English skills up and all of that. When I had him for math, I'm watching that everything is firing. And because I had a child who was also gifted in math and science, I recognized that. I went to the teacher, who was white, and I was told that, because I said, he really needs to be pushed on. He really needs to be, you all need to start sending him over to a different group, regardless of the English skills. He understands numbers. He gets that. You show him those concepts, you can demonstrate it. He's off and running. He's above everybody in the group. She told me that no, because his English is still very important and he can't do that. And so he can't be in gifted because he can't learn that because he doesn't understand English. But me, who did not have that specialist background, noticed what this child was doing. Mm-hmm. And they just didn't want to see it. And I saw it all day. So how do we, and so this is in a whole nother state, a whole nother school system. I'm gonna say the system's not broken, it's working as it's designed to work. Okay.
It's a refusal. That child was clearly gifted, but it was a refusal to see it. It was a refusal to see it. Yeah. And
he may have been gifted in language arts. I didn't have the means to assess him in that way. I used to say at that point I was better in Spanish. It was still pidgin Spanish, to be clear. So I wasn't in a position to assess him in that way. I could definitely assess him in math. I was in a position to do that coming from a science background and field. I was in a position to know, I'm watching this happen. I'm watching my own child who had a disability also be able to excel at math. And it turns out he could excel at writing and reading too, if people gave him the support. Yeah. And that's all I was looking for him. I ended up through the track because I was that activist staff member who was off advocating for that child. I pulled the parents aside. I went into the assistant principal. I went into the principal. I finally got him pulled. But, it was like pulling teeth to have that happen. And what would have happened with that had I not gotten involved?
Yeah.
What would have happened had I not gotten involved? So many children don't get what they need because they just don't have the advocate, and the parents don't know how to do it, don't know if they should do it. Mm-hmm. And so they take the word of the experts in the building. And the experts in the building don't always know what's best for that child or willing to recognize it.
Yeah.
Sometimes our own biases can get in the way constantly, and they usually do.
It's unfortunate. You shouldn't have to have, an attorney for your child to
Absolutely.
get to get the support and resources that they need to thrive. So
absolutely. Yes. And so that tracking thing that starts off in elementary continues through to those numbers you all were talking about for high school, for college preparedness. Because if you don't get the foundation, that foundation is built in elementary school. Let's be very, very clear. Dropping children into a higher level class later on at middle or at high school level, which they do a lot at the high school level because they want to get their AP numbers up to get awards, right? even though to get the awards, you just need them in the class. So you end up frustrating the student who could have done well with some added supports because you didn't give them the foundation. So they needed the foundation on the front end. And if you're going to drop them in there, give them the support when you drop them in, because you know you've disenfranchised them already, right? So you need to give them the extra support so that they can be successful in those classes, and that they will start taking more of them when they start saying, okay, well, I can do this. I can be successful. A lot of kids won't do it because they don't feel like they're going to be successful. They feel like it's too challenging. I don't have any support. This is going to be a lot of work. And how do I teach myself? They're not there to teach themselves. We have experts in the building. And so we need to have those experts doing what they should be doing. And you have to advocate for the children, just like if they were your own. As a former school employee, in another state, those children were my own, and I advocated for them as if they were my own. I was hired at one school because I was told I was an activist parent, so I would understand their activist parents. I said, sure will. I'm gonna help them. I'm gonna give them some policies and send them off and keep them learning. And we've got to be able to do that. We've got to be able to support the children, because you can support them on the front end, or you can support them through your tax dollars in the prison when they're not successful, when they're not the happy person in your community because they've been frustrated through all of their lives. And so, one way or another, I want to live in a community where people are doing the things that brings them their inner joy, that they feel fulfilled with. I don't want to be around angry people who are disenfranchised at every turn and continue to be.
I think that's a great point. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of this presentation. And Marlon, we are your pupils. Thank you for.
I learn more from you all than you all learn from me. Let's be clear on that.
Thank you for your guidance. And Gwinnett is truly so fortunate to have you. Gwinnett kids, especially those who don't have an advocate, they're so fortunate to have someone like you arguing and advocating for on their behalf, even though your children have long graduated and gone on to be successful. The fact that you stayed behind for the kids who are continued to be left behind speaks volume of your character and your advocacy. And I'm really honored to be able to do this work alongside you, and excited to have other advocates,
yes.
Rama and Amina, along and doing this work. I know we have a lot on our plates, but this was learning about this and sharing it with other people. It feels really good to get this information out there and to speak the truth, and hopefully people will listen and also join our cause.
Absolutely. I appreciate your kind words, Melody, but I learned so much more from you all than you'll ever get from me. So just know that. Are you going to go over our next upcoming dates?
Yeah. So looking ahead, so we have two sessions are a wrap now out of our 4-part political education series. So we had an introduction on July 13th that discussed the foundation of the education crisis and how there has never been, people say we should fix the education system. It has always been broken. It has always been plagued with white supremacy, discrimination, unequal opportunities. And so there is never a point you can go back into history and point where there was fairness in this education system. It just doesn't exist. And so after that introduction, we just had tonight, we're wrapping up our August 10th, Still Separate and Unequal part of the series. And so both of these, although we're on live now, and the first one was on live, they will be available on the Gwinnett SToPP Facebook page. So you can rewatch them, go through them at your leisure. Our next one is October 12th. So originally we had published that we were going to do the police-free in November, but we're actually going to move that up to October because there is a national campaign with Dignity in Schools for police-free schools, and it is going to be on fire this year because that so many things have been, yes, Marlon has it on her shirt, counselors not cops, education is a human right. But we are going to have a robust campaign this year. So we're really excited to just come back in October. We're taking a break for next month. We're going to come back on October 12th, talk about police-free schools and why it's important, counselors, not cops. Stop surveilling, stop arresting, stop tasing our kids. And then we're also November 9th, we're going to do the Native American boarding schools in the COVID crisis. Since, there's usually so many lies told in November about Native peoples, we're going to tell some truth about how Indigenous people have always been treated in this country and how the boarding school crisis, which also was its own pandemic, connects to the current situation. And by then, we'll be able to revisit Gwinnett's COVID response and how they're addressing the situation. So we're grateful to have you with us, and we look forward to more sessions. And stay safe, wear a mask, social distance, and we wish you the best of luck. Thank you for joining.
Yes, thank you. Good night, everyone. And please sign our petition and tell your story. The links were dropped in the comment section, so please do that. And you all have a very good evening. Thank you, ladies. I have to give you my own applause. Like I said, I learned so much more from you all than you'll ever get from me. But everyone have a great evening.